She's my cherry pie. Cool drink of water, such a sweet surprise. Tastes so good, make a grown man cry. Sweet cherry pie. Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing today? As you guys can tell, I'm in much better spirits. I'm still a little nasally, but I'm in much better spirits. Also, for a couple reasons. One, because I get to see an early screening of Spider-Man No Way Home this weekend for the press junket, which is going to be cool. So I get to interview the cast. No idea who I'm going to interview yet. And two, I have a theory about Spider-Man No Way Home that I'm going to talk about over at Geek Culture Explained, probably on Wednesday. So here's the thing. Let us continue with our discussion on Spider-Verse, specifically where we picked off with last time when I left you guys on a massive cliffhanger, which was Verna of the Inheritors basically going after Miles Morales, the ultimate Spider-Man. Now, as soon as this happens, you immediately are met by the arrival of Assassin Spider-Man and Spider-Punk, right? Punk Rock Spider-Man. But these guys basically show up and they're able to fight off Verna and her forces pretty quickly. And then of course, they immediately recruit Miles as well as Jessica Drew from the Ultimate Universe. And we'll talk about her here in a second. But one of the funny things about this is that Miles recognizes Superior Spider-Man, and he recognizes him from the events of Cataclysm. Well, technically it was Cataclysm, the Ultimate's last stand, and Miles Morales only saw Superior Spider-Man for like 2 seconds while he was trying to escape the Baxter Building in the main Marvel Universe when they were time displaced to an alternate reality after Wolverine broke time in Age of Ultron. There was a lot that happened in Cataclysm. The important thing is Miles Morales didn't know that was Superior Spider-Man. He thought it was just regular Peter Parker wearing a different costume, albeit a better costume. But the important thing here is that because they're basically on the verge of death, this leads to Miles and Jessica Drew basically going alongside Superior Spider-Man and everybody else. Now, at that point, you switch over to Earth 13. This is something that I want to clarify for everybody because it's something that seemed to throw people off in the last few videos that we did. And this is largely my fault for not making this a little clear. What you have here are basically two teams of Spider-Men that by and large don't seem to be aware of the other. That you've got Superior Spider-Man and his team, and then you've got this team that grabbed Peter Parker and have him in the safe zone for Earth 13. So that's something that I wanted to sort of explain here. Now, the other thing that goes on is, again, we'll kind of explain this as we go forward into the future of the Spider-Verse event. But one of the things that's going on here is that, again, they refer to Peter Parker as basically their chosen one. And this is for a couple different reasons, but the most significant reason is because he's the only Spider-Man across the entirety of the multiverse, seemingly, that's faced off against an inheritor and not only lived, but actually killed them. Remember, Morlun's died a couple times at the hands of Spider-Man. And so because of that, he's kind of like the guy that they're really picking to sort of lead them into the whole thing, because he seems to be the one to actually know how to win. Now, while all that's going on, you of course have Cindy Moon. And again, because of the fact that she's the bride as part of the Spider Totems, again, we'll explain that in future videos, that what happens is she actually kind of pokes around at these different versions of Peter Parker. And the reason why is because, as we discussed again in a previous video, Peter Parker from the main Marvel Universe gives off a kind of scent, a sort of pheromone that draws Cindy Moon to him. And so the two of them just can't stop knocking boots. And so Cindy Moon's question is, if she's in close proximity to other Spider-Men, will it have the exact same effect? In the end, it doesn't really seem to be the case, that she does pick up on pheromones and there is some general level of attraction, but Dan Slott doesn't really differentiate between her just kind of being like, I mean, that version of Peter Parker is hot, and her just kind of being like, I need to get with them, right? Because of like the pheromones and all that kind of stuff. The other part of this is that with the team becoming aware of the fact that there is a second team of Spider-Man out there, their goal is to bring them to this universe. Because remember, Earth 13 is home to Cosmic Spider-Man, basically a version of Peter Parker with the power cosmic, the Enigma Force, right? He never lost it in this universe like he did in the main Marvel universe. And one of the things that's been established here is that because this version of Peter Parker has so much power, the Inheritors would be foolish to come here and to basically start a conflict. And so in a lot of ways, they're literally in just like this giant steel vault, right? Where they're basically safe from the Inheritors. The other Spider team, it's like they're hiding out in a hut made of straw, right? I mean, it's only a matter of time before the Inheritors find them. And when they do, they'll overpower all of them, especially if the Inheritors show up in a large number. And so you basically end up seeing the group splitting off into teams. Now, there's a couple things that happen here. One, Cindy Moon is told to stay put, just because of the concern being that with her having her pheromones and all that kind of stuff, that it could lead the Inheritors to them. And again, that ties into the nature of the totems. But the other part is Peter Parker doesn't want Spider-Gwen to go, because as you guys know, Gwen Stacy died in his universe. And so in a lot of ways, it's kind of Peter Parker just not wanting to relive the death of Gwen Stacy. One of those things where he almost kind of believes in like predestination, that like Gwen Stacy across the multiverse multiverse is destined to die. He doesn't really say it that that's the case. We're not really even told that's the case. In all honesty, the continued existence of Gwen Stacy seems to fly in the face of that. But because of the fact that it was a huge ordeal for him, he doesn't want to have to experience that again, let alone put her in jeopardy if he doesn't need to. And so what ends up happening is you basically switch over to the team of Superior Spider-Man when all the other Spider-Men emerge. Now, here's an important thing to understand. As soon as Peter Parker from the main Marvel Universe shows up here, he immediately recognizes Superior Spider-Man, but he doesn't say anything, right? So Superior Spider-Man does not know this is Peter Parker who gets his body back at a future point in time. At this point, Superior Spider-Man is just kind of operating under the idea that he will basically be Spider-Man forever, right? Or until his body gives out and he dies, whatever it is, but he doesn't really have to worry about losing his body again to Peter Parker. More so than that, what ends up happening is that Superior Spider-Man had actually developed a device that basically masked their scent from the Inheritors. So the Inheritors could show up on this world, and unless they're able to physically locate the individual Spider-Man under the protection of Superior Spider-Man, they would never be found. The problem here is that this device is designed to protect a particular number of people. It only has so much power to it. With all these other Spider-Men showing up here, it overrides the whole thing. That combined with the fact that Cindy Moon ignores her orders and shows up in this universe is basically ringing the dinner bell, right? It's like giant purple letters across the multiverse telling the Inheritors, hey, we're all here. And the Inheritors just come pouring in, right? I mean, really, it's only Deimos who shows up here, but Deimos shows up and starts attacking everybody. Now, here's a big difference. When it comes to Superior Spider-Man, one of the things that we covered when we initially covered his run, one of the things that was made apparent to us by Dan Slott is he does not mess around, that he is meticulous when it comes to battle strategy. And the reason why is because Dr. Octopus is so incredibly intelligent. And we'd have to believe that when he began to realize that Spider-Man from across the multiverse were being tracked down and killed by the Inheritors, it wasn't enough to assemble a team. He also had to have some kind of battle strategy for what they could do when they faced off against the Inheritors, because we saw them fight against some of the Inheritors and they were overwhelmed pretty quickly. But as always, Dr. Octopus learned from his mistakes and then went forward from there. And so that's why you see him basically barking orders at these different Spider-Men to attack in different ways. And by and large, while they don't necessarily get the upper hand on Deimos, they do exactly what they were supposed to do, which was create an opening whereby Superior Spider-Man could deliver the killing blow. And he succeeds. He kills Deimos, right? He kills one of the Inheritors. And that's kind of a funny thing because right off the bat, the response to that is something's wrong, that this body should have basically broken down. It's Peter Parker who recognizes it, right? In the various conflicts that he's had and in the times when Morlun has died, his body has dissolved. And so that's one of the big questions is why hasn't the body of Deimos broken down here? Now, of course, the response, and really this is actually something that's noticed by Miguel O'Hara, that there's what's basically a stasis charge. That what had happened is Dr. Octopus had augmented his weaponry in the Superior Spider-Man suit with 2099 technology. And so what this has basically done is it's put the body of Deimos in a kind of stasis. And so what this means is they can take the body and then literally analyze it, study it. They can learn how the physiology of the Inheritors work, which is probably one of the best possible things they could have at their disposal, right? They can find a weakness. They can reverse engineer how their powers work and find a way to prevent the Inheritors from siphoning off the life force of the Spider-Men themselves. There's any number of ways they can approach this. Now, the other thing about that is that Peter Parker is not a fan of Superior Spider-Man killing Deimos. Now, again, this to a degree is kind of the naive nature of Peter Parker, that if this was just some random criminal out there, sure, I guess an argument could be made. But you're literally talking about a force of beings that are tracking them down, and that unless they're killed or stopped, incapacitated in some way, they will never stop. They will always come after them. And so this is one of those circumstances where the only way to stop them is to kill them. But the other big problem is they realize that the scent of Cindy Moon, of Silk, is basically more potent than any of the other Spider-Men here, or at least that seems to be the case. And so for the most part, they are all kind of grasping at straws. And it's one of the things that Old Man Spider says, right? We don't really know the identity of this guy. We simply know they refer to him as Old Man. We'll find out who he is here in a minute. But he basically says, like, it doesn't matter what any of you believe. You're fumbling around in the dark. You have no idea what's actually happening, but I need to explain it to you. But in typical comic book fashion, This guy's killed. Not only is he killed, he's killed by Deimos. And so what we end up finding out here is that the inheritors have found a way to clone themselves, that in order to ensure that they won't be killed in any one particular universe, basically learning the lessons of what happened to Morlun, they send what are essentially clone bodies of themselves out into the multiverse in order to track down and kill these various Spider-Men, so that if one of these inheritors are killed, a clone takes their place. So they never have to worry about actually dying off as a race. It's a genius maneuver. It's an incredibly intelligent thing to do. And so with the other inheritors showing up as well, basically totaling in 3, the only thing these Spider-Men can do is run. And so they actually start breaking off into groups. The first group that breaks off is Ben Reilly, one of the clones of Peter Parker from an alternate reality, and Kane, the clone of Peter Parker from the main Marvel universe, along with Jessica Drew, who's a clone of Peter Parker from the Ultimate Universe. They break off to go try to find the clone factory where it is these inheritors are being created. Other members of the Spider-Man team start breaking off as well, right? You've got Jessica Drew, you've got Cindy Moon. They break off and do their thing. They kind of start splitting into factions, right? Spider-Man Noir actually ends up going with them. This was basically Marvel just kind of splitting the team off in order to launch tie-in comics, which we will cover. And in fact, we'll transition to one of those here in a second. But what you actually end up learning here as Peter Parker begins to make his escape, and Miles Morales, of course, goes through and all that kind of stuff, that he's stopped by Old Man Spider, who actually turns out to be Ezekiel from an alternate reality. Now, again, Ezekiel was the one who first introduced Peter Parker in the main Marvel universe to everything involving the inheritors in the first place, that the inheritors existed, they were tracking down Spider-Man, all that kind of stuff, right? All that work that J. Michael Straczynski did that led into the run of Dan Slott and this Spider-Verse event, it all harkens back to the original Ezekiel. This version of Ezekiel is from a reality where Morlun successfully killed that universe's version of Peter Parker. And so he basically donned the Spider-Man costume, or at least some variation of it, in order to carry on the legacy of Peter Parker. But what he says and what he does is kind of give him not really a list of names so much as a list of titles. He says the scion, the other, the bride, they're all that matter. These individuals have to be kept safe. That's something that I want you guys to keep in the back of your head. But of course, again, what this does is it leads to us basically following the clones themselves, right? Following Jessica Drew, following Ben Reilly, and Kane. Now again, Jessica Drew is basically a clone of Peter Parker from an alternate universe from the Ultimate Universe. And in all honesty, she's basically Black Widow by all standards of measurement, right? Like the Ultimate Universe version of that character. And now that I think about it, I feel like that does deserve a little bit of explanation. So the way this worked in the Ultimate Universe is you did have a Natasha Romanoff. You did have a Black Widow. It turned out that in Ultimates 2, issues 10 through 13, that she was actually a traitor, and she ended up basically assisting the Liberators, kind of like this invading group, to topple the United States, which for the most part, they were successful in doing as payback for the United States basically toppling the Soviet Union. Ultimately, she was injured by Iron Man, and then she was killed in Ultimates 2, issue number 13 by Hawkeye. And so really it was more young Ultimates than anything else, but technically it first happened in All New Ultimates Volume 1. She donned the moniker of Black Widow and then went forward from there. It was a way for Marvel to kind of move her away from being like the clone of Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe to basically having like her own identity and her own character. It was cool for what it was. I didn't really care what moniker she had. I just loved the character in general. But all these guys, or at least the three of them, basically show up in this alternate universe here. And once they get in there, what they're expecting, because it seems to be the home world of the inheritors, at least from where they're coming from, what they're expecting is basically this kind of Earth where like it's fire and brimstone and they've conquered everything and all that kind of stuff. But when they get out there, what they find is that it actually looks kind of like a utopia, like a technological utopia. And it's kind of a crazy thing because of course with Kane, the Scarlet Spider, he doesn't really need to hide himself per se because he's got a suit that basically makes him invisible. But for Jessica Drew and Ben Reilly, if they go swinging through what is supposed to be the home world of the inheritors, the race of beings that are trying to kill them, they'll do nothing but draw attention to themselves, right? And so right off the bat, they're like, okay, we need to basically hide. And so of course they end up donning some smocks from hospitals, right? So basically hospital garb with their back ends hanging out, which is always the most embarrassing thing ever. But as they get in there, you end up finding out that this world is basically ruled by Genix. Now, Genix is a member of the inheritor race, but he's more of like the scientific member of the inheritor race, right? Like their main science guy. The other thing that's also discovered here is that while they're making their way through this building, they end up seeing all these individuals who are essentially clones. And they're really in like a very docile state with Genix on a screen talking about how you are elegant, you're a part of a big complex system, different things along those lines. We're not really given a lot of information insofar as how this world functions, at least at the moment. Instead, they end up drawing the attention of one of the science guys who's actually this reality's version of Max Modell, the guy who leads Horizon Labs in the main Marvel universe, and is actually a kind of, well, I wouldn't say father figure, but very much a mentor for Peter Parker. They end up getting his attention, and then in turn, everything starts to pop off, right? They basically web this guy up, their cover's blown, and they take off. Now at that point, because of the fact that they're basically encountering like, you know, security and all that kind of stuff, they have to redon their suits, and the jig is up, right? Like everybody knows that like Spider-Man are here now, and that of course leads to the arrival of Iron Man, which is a crazy thing to see that in this universe, Iron Man exists. And it's one of the things that's very easy to forget when it comes to the Inheritors. They have no desire to kill like Iron Man or like Captain America or any of those guys. They track spider characters. Now, if in some alternate reality, the Avengers get in the way of the Inheritors trying to kill that version of Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Spider-Girl, whoever, they'll kill the Avengers, right? They'll kill whoever they need to in order to get to their target. And again, that ties into the benefit of clone bodies, that if that Inheritor were killed, their clone would come back with the knowledge of how it was they died and some means to overcome those forces and try again. The response of Iron Man is basically one of immediately attacking them. Now, of course, they get the upper hand on him, they're able to subdue him, and then in turn, it becomes a big interrogation of what Iron Man knows, how this world works, but he's not really dumping a whole lot of information. All he really says is that in this reality, Genix basically runs the world, and that Genix operates out of the Baxter Building, which, as most of you guys know, is traditionally the home of the Fantastic Four. The other thing about this, and what's kind of crazy, is the question is asked like, Tony Stark, how did you get like this? And while we're not really given a definitive answer, the explanation that's offered here is that most likely what happened is Tony Stark in this universe was probably killed. And this is a clone of that version of Tony Stark. That in fact, most every citizen on this planet is likely a clone designed to be docile, designed to never resist the control of Genix himself. That Genix isn't really viewed as like a god among these people, but is certainly viewed as a person whose authority is beyond contestation. And so this again basically leads to the clones heading towards the Baxter Building. Now this actually leads to a pretty genius maneuver where you actually have them strip Tony Stark of his armor, and then Ben Reilly dons the armor himself and then pretends to lead them in as what are basically prisoners. It's a pretty smart maneuver, right? It's a very intelligent thing to do, because when that happens, basically Jessica Drew breaks free and it's like, oh my God, she's free, somebody stop her, right? And then like while security's dealing with her, you have Ben Reilly in the Iron Man suit basically taking Kane and then leading him to quote unquote the prison cells, which allows Jessica Drew to basically do her thing and buy them as much time as they possibly can. The problem here is that while you would expect Ben Reilly in his Iron Man suit and Kane to be able to sort of move through the building almost at their leisure, so long as it's being treated like like Iron Man escorting a prisoner, and investigate the place, learn more about the planet, where they're at, where the clone factory is that's creating these Inheritor clones so they can destroy it, all that kind of stuff, they're suddenly met by the arrival of Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, who is, quite likely in this universe, one of the most powerful beings on the planet. I would even argue Johnny Storm is probably one of the most powerful beings across the Marvel multiverse, right? That guy, he's just super powerful. Like Johnny Storm in any universe is ridiculously OP. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.